My family told me to stop pretending to be rich, but here's the twist. I'm the one controlling their $200 million company stock. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place my family loved to flaunt. Crystal glasses caught the glow of chandeliers, and servers hovered like shadows, ready to refill wine glasses before they were even half empty. I sat at the end of the long table, dressed in a simple navy dress I had bought on clearance. It wasn't flashy, but it was me. Sam. My sister Madison's voice cut through the air, sharp and dripping with mockery. You really wore that to dinner? God, you act like you belong here. She sipped her champagne and smirked at Brent, our older brother, who was already shaking his head. Brent chuckled. Stop pretending to be rich, Sam. You live in that tiny apartment and drive. What is it, a 10-year-old Honda? You're embarrassing yourself. Their laughter rang out, and my mother Elaine dabbed at her lips with a linen napkin before chiming in. We just want what's best for you, darling. Maybe it's time you accept who you are. You'll never be able to keep up with us. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. My father, Thomas, leaned back in his chair with that smug grin he wore like armor. Your sister's right. All this, playing dress-up, joining us at places like this. It's not your world. Don't fool yourself. Heat rushed to my cheeks, but I kept my smile steady. Inside, though, a storm brewed. I remembered every time they excluded me from their luxurious vacations, every sideways glance at my clothes, every whispered joke about the poor one of the family. They saw me as weak, as small, as nothing. I took a sip of water, steadying myself. It's just dinner, I said lightly, my voice calm, almost detached. No need to make a scene. Madison leaned closer across the table, eyes flashing with cruel delight. That's the point, Sam. You don't belong in these scenes. For a split second, I wanted to scream, to hurl the truth in their faces right there. That the empire they lived off of, the business they bragged about at every dinner party, wasn't theirs to command. That I, the overlooked daughter, the one they mocked, held the power they worshipped. But instead, I swallowed the words and let silence be my weapon. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that the entire time they'd been laughing, I'd been sitting on the one card they could never play. The majority stake. 51% of Hale Industries, gifted to me by the only man who ever truly saw me, my grandfather. So I smiled, let them laugh, let them enjoy their wine and their false superiority. They thought I was pretending. But soon, very soon, they would realize the truth. I wasn't pretending to be rich. I was the one holding the strings to their entire kingdom. And when the time came, I wouldn't be silent anymore. When I think back to the only person who ever truly believed in me, my mind always returns to my grandfather, Richard Hale. While the rest of my family saw me as an inconvenience, he saw me as something more. As a little girl, I was often left out of the important gatherings, shuttled off to the side while my parents and siblings basked in wealth and attention. But Grandpa Richard would slip away from the crowd, find me, and ask about my drawings, my books, my dreams. You've got more fire than all of them combined, Sammy, he would tell me, patting my hand with his weathered fingers. They don't see it now, but I do. And one day, you'll surprise them all. Our bond only deepened as I grew older. Unlike my parents, who measured success in designer labels and bank balances, Grandpa measured character. He saw how my siblings mocked me, how my mother sighed with disappointment whenever I walked into a room. He noticed that I worked hard, even in small ways, and that I never begged for handouts. Where they saw failure, he saw resilience. The memory of his final days is etched into me with painful clarity. The house was quiet that night, the sterile smell of medicine clinging to the air. I sat beside his bed, holding his frail hand. His once commanding voice was softer, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, still held that familiar light. Sam, he whispered, motioning for me to lean closer. I don't trust them. Not your father, not your mother, not Brent or Madison. They only see the company as a wallet. They'll bleed it dry if left unchecked. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I know, Grandpa, but what can I do? He smiled faintly, and in that smile was a secret, a gift, and a burden all at once. You already have the answer. I've made sure of it. That night, he revealed what no one else in the family knew. He had left me 51% of Hale Industries. The controlling stock. The empire that kept their lives gilded was already in my hands, sealed tightly in trusts and legal documents drawn up by his most trusted lawyers. My breath caught. Me? But why me? Because you're the only one who understands responsibility, he rasped. The rest are wolves. You'll protect the legacy. But promise me something, Sam. Don't tell them. Not yet. They'll never accept it until the truth cuts them down. Wait. Wait for the right time. I nodded through tears, clutching his hand as if I could keep him here longer. I promise. He closed his eyes with a sigh of relief, and within days he was gone. From that moment, the secret became my shield. I lived with their insults, their cruelty, their smug superiority, because I knew what they didn't. The empire they flaunted wasn't theirs. It was mine. And one day, when the time was right, they would learn just how much Grandpa had trusted me over them all. The years of mistreatment didn't happen all at once. It was like a steady drip of poison, seeping into every corner of my life. My family made sure I never forgot my place. To them, I was the odd one out, the black sheep, the poor one who could never measure up. I remember the first time it truly sank in. I was fresh out of college, proud of landing a job at a small nonprofit organization. It wasn't glamorous, and the paycheck was modest, but the work mattered to me. At a family gathering, I told them about the community projects I was working on, the people I was helping. Instead of support, I got laughter. Brent smirked, leaning back in his chair. That's cute, Sam. Playing social worker while the rest of us actually make real money. Madison, barely 20 at the time but already spoiled by her endless credit cards, chimed in. Do they even pay you, or do you work for hugs? The table erupted in laughter, and I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. It didn't stop there. Every family vacation, every holiday, every dinner became another opportunity to remind me that I wasn't like them. When they jetted off to Paris or the Bahamas, I'd see the pictures online. Madison posing with cocktails, Brent showing off his tailored suits, my parents surrounded by luxury. I was never invited. When I asked once, my mother's answer was sharp. You wouldn't fit in, Sam. These trips are for people who know how to live at that level. At Christmas, while they exchanged watches, designer bags, and jewelry, I'd get gift cards or cheap trinkets that barely felt thought out. One year, Brent actually gave me a thrift store sweater with the tag still attached, laughing as he said, It's your style, right? Budget-friendly. But the worst of it was the constant ridicule of my lifestyle. My modest apartment became their favorite punchline. You live in a shoebox, my father, Thomas, would say, shaking his head in mock pity. Why don't you just come back home? Oh, wait, you're too proud for that. My mother, Elaine, would sigh dramatically, as though my very existence was a disappointment. Your siblings are thriving, she'd say. Brent's handling the company projects, Madison's building her brand. And you scrape by with your little job. When will you grow up? I learned not to argue. At first, I tried defending myself, insisting that I was happy in my own way, but it only fueled their mockery. So eventually, I played along. I nodded, smiled, and laughed at their jokes, all while hiding the quiet fury building inside me. They thought I was weak. They thought I was harmless. But behind every insult, every exclusion, every smirk, my resentment grew sharper. I endured it because I had a promise to keep and a secret to guard. And while they saw me as the family failure, I knew something they couldn't even imagine. One day, the poor one would be the only one with real power. The night of the dinner still burns in my memory, every word like acid on my skin. I had almost made it through the evening by biting my tongue, letting their laughter and smugness wash over me. But then Madison, with her cruel eyes and painted smile, leaned across the table and delivered the line that cut deeper than all the others. Honestly, Sam, you're pathetic, she sneered, her gaze sliding down my dress as if it were trash. Showing up here in that bargain bin outfit like you actually belong. You should have just stayed home. At least then you wouldn't embarrass yourself. Her voice dripped with venom, and the table roared with laughter. Brent slapped the table, shaking his head. She'll never get it, Maddie. Sam, stop pretending to be rich. You'll never be one of us. Something inside me shifted in that moment. For years, I had endured their insults, their smug superiority, their constant need to remind me I was the outsider in my own bloodline. I had smiled through their cruelty, reminded myself of Grandpa's promise, told myself to wait. But that night, as their laughter echoed in that glittering restaurant, something inside me snapped. I didn't show it on my face. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I lifted my glass of water, sipped calmly, and let them believe they had won yet another round. But inside, my heart was pounding, my mind racing. Enough was enough. When dinner ended, they barely acknowledged me. Madison kissed the air beside my cheek. Brent didn't even bother to say goodbye, and my parents walked out ahead as though I weren't worth waiting for. I stood on the sidewalk in the cool night air, watching their luxury cars glide away, their laughter trailing behind them like ghosts. By the time I got into my own car, yes, the pathetic 10-year-old Honda, I already knew what I was going to do. My fingers trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel, but it wasn't from fear. It was from resolve. The secret had been locked inside me for too long. My grandfather had trusted me to wait for the right moment, and I realized then that moment had finally arrived. They thought they had stripped me of every ounce of dignity, but they had no idea I was holding the power they worshipped most. The company, the money, the empire. When I got home, I didn't bother to change out of my dress. I kicked off my shoes, sat at my desk, and picked up my phone. My lawyer's number was already saved, sitting there like a loaded gun. I pressed call. His voice was steady when he answered, as though he had been expecting me. "Sam? Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, my anger sharpening into determination. "Yes," I said. "It's time. They need to know who really holds the power." And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence lift. The game was about to change. The next morning, I drove to the family mansion with a folder in my bag and a storm in my chest. The long driveway was lined with trimmed hedges and expensive cars gleaming under the sun. I had walked up those steps 1,000 times before, always feeling smaller, always bracing myself for their smirks and their casual cruelty. But this time, I wasn't coming as the poor one. I was coming as the person who held their empire in her hands. When the butler opened the door, his eyes widened slightly at my unannounced visit. "Miss Hale," he said carefully, "they're in the lounge." "Shall I?" "No need." I cut in softly. "I'll find them myself." I walked into the lounge where my parents, Brent, and Madison sat around the grand fireplace, sipping coffee and talking in that careless way of people who think the world belongs to them. My father, Thomas, barely glanced up. "Sam," he said flatly, "this isn't a good time. If you're here to ask for help with rent again, talk to your mother later." I set my bag down on the coffee table and pulled out the folder. My voice was calm, steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to give you the truth." They all looked up then. Elaine tilted her head with a frown. Madison's lips curled into a smirk, and Brent leaned back with his arms crossed, waiting to be entertained. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Signed legal papers, notarized, sealed. "The proof. These," I said, tapping the pages, "are the shares to Hale Industries. 51%. Majority control. And they belong to me." For a moment, silence. The kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. Brent's face drained of color. He leaned forward, scanning the papers, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Madison let out a laugh, high-pitched and nervous. "This is ridiculous. Grandpa would never." "He did." I cut her off. "Grandpa Richard left me control of the company. He didn't trust the rest of you, and now I see why. He saw the greed, the cruelty. He knew what you'd become." Elaine sputtered, her coffee cup clattering back into its saucer. "That's absurd. Why would he choose you? You've done nothing." "Nothing." I snapped, the years of bitterness slipping through. "Nothing but endure your insults? Nothing but live without your help while you all mocked me? Maybe that's exactly why he trusted me. Because I'm not like you." My father's jaw tightened, his face red with fury. "You're lying. This is some kind of mistake." "No," I said simply. "This is the truth. The empire you live off, the lifestyle you flaunt, it's mine now. And every time you called me pathetic, every time you laughed at me for being poor, you were mocking the only person who actually owns everything you have." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. For the first time in my life, they were the ones left speechless. The room erupted the moment the weight of my words settled. It was as if I had lit a fuse in the center of the mansion's pristine lounge. My father shot to his feet, his face darkening with rage. "You mean to tell me," Thomas thundered, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "that you've had this control, all along and you said nothing? How dare you keep this from your family?" "From me?" I didn't flinch. I sat back against the leather sofa, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "You mean how dare I keep it from the people who spent years tearing me down? Who mocked me, humiliated me, excluded me? Grandpa asked me to wait until the time was right. And now, after last night, I know for certain he was right not to trust any of you." Madison shot up from her chair, her face twisted with fury. "This is insane. You think you can just walk in here and wave some papers around like you're in charge? You're pathetic, Sam. You'll always be pathetic. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. Don't walk away, Madison, my father barked, but she was already gone, her angry muttering fading down the hallway. Brent, still pale but seething, leaned forward with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think you're clever, don't you? But this won't stand. I'll take you to court, Sam. I'll have these so-called documents torn apart by the best lawyers money can buy. I met his threat with calm certainty. You can try, but Grandpa's lawyers were better than yours will ever be. Every page is airtight. Every signature verified. You can fight me, Brent, but you'll lose. Just like you've been losing to me all along without even knowing it. Elaine let out a strangled sob, clutching at her pearls as though they were the only thing keeping her upright. How could he do this? She cried. How could Richard do this to us? To me? He trusted you, Samantha? Over his own son? Over us? Her tears flowed freely, streaking her perfectly powdered cheeks. For a flicker of a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered every Christmas gift meant to humiliate me, every birthday I spent alone while they vacationed somewhere glamorous, every cruel word from her lips when she told me I'd never amount to anything. I leaned forward, my voice steady but sharp. He trusted me because I'm not like you. He wanted to protect the company from your greed, your carelessness, your obsession with appearances. And every insult you've thrown at me since he passed only proved him right. Thomas slammed his fist on the table, rattling the coffee cups. This isn't over, Sam. Don't think you can walk in here and destroy everything we've built. I stood, gathering the papers back into my folder with quiet precision. I'm not destroying anything, I said, meeting his furious glare. I'm saving it from you. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving their fury, denial, and tears behind me. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the walls of that mansion. Walking into the first board meeting as the majority shareholder was like stepping onto a battlefield. The long mahogany table gleamed under the lights, surrounded by men in sharp suits who had always looked past me as if I were invisible. This time, though, their eyes followed me as I took the seat at the head of the table, Grandpa's old chair. My nameplate waited there, bold and undeniable. Samantha Hale, majority shareholder. Brent was already seated, his smug grin plastered on like a mask. He thought he still had the room in his pocket. I'll start with my proposal, he said smoothly, clicking through a flashy presentation on the projector. Charts and numbers filled the screen, all pointing toward his plan for aggressive international expansion. When he finished, polite applause followed. He leaned back, confident, already expecting approval. With this plan, we'll dominate the market in less than 5 years, he declared, his eyes flicking to me with challenge. I let the silence hang before I spoke. No. The room stilled. Brent blinked. Excuse me. I folded my hands on the table. This expansion is reckless. The data you're ignoring shows the risk outweighs the reward. It's a gamble, one that would drain resources we can't afford to waste. Brent's face reddened. You don't know what you're talking about. You've never run a company. I slid a stack of papers across the table. Actually, I do. I reviewed every financial report from the past 10 years. You've been covering short-term wins with long-term losses. This expansion would bury us. As majority shareholder, I veto it. Gasps rippled through the room. Brent's smirk faltered. The next strike came quietly but with equal force. Madison's fashion budget, a bloated expense funneled through the company under the guise of brand promotion, appeared on the next agenda. She wasn't even present, probably shopping somewhere on the company's dime. But her entitled fingerprints were all over the numbers. I raised a brow at the line item. This stops now. Personal vanity projects are not company expenses. Effective immediately, her funding is cut. A murmur spread. Someone chuckled under their breath. For years, Madison had paraded around in couture while calling it business. Not anymore. The following weeks, I dug deeper. I restructured leadership, replacing yes men with competent professionals who actually cared about the company's future. I reinstated overlooked employees with fresh ideas. Slowly, Hale Industries began to feel less like my father's kingdom and more like the empire Grandpa intended it to be. And my family? They watched in stunned silence as their privileges crumbled. Brent raged behind closed doors, Madison whined over the phone, Elaine wept about her image, and Thomas glared at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. But I didn't waver. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving in their shadow. I was leading. Each decision wasn't just revenge, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't some weak outsider. I wasn't pretending. I was in control. And I wasn't giving it back. It happened late one evening, after a long day of restructuring meetings. I was gathering my things from the office when I heard the familiar click of heels in the hallway. My mother's voice followed, low and trembling. "Sam, wait." I turned to see Elaine standing there, dressed impeccably as always, though her face carried something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her as though afraid someone might witness what she was about to say. "Sam," she began, wringing her hands, "please. I need to talk to you." I raised a brow, setting my bag down. "About what? The company? Your credit line? Madison's shopping allowance?" Her eyes darted away, shame flickering for just a second. "No. About us." She took a shaky breath. "I know things have been strained between us. But you don't have to do this. You don't have to punish us. We're your family." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Family? That's what you call it." She flinched at the sharpness of my voice. For years, I had kept my anger buried under forced smiles, but now the dam cracked wide open. "You want to talk about family?" I stepped closer. "Do you remember the time I told you I wanted to be an artist? You laughed and said, 'Art doesn't feed mouths, Samantha. Try doing something useful for once.' Or when I got my first apartment, you called it a shoebox and told me I was embarrassing the Hales." Her lips parted, but I didn't stop. The words I had held back for nearly a decade poured out like fire. Every holiday, you compared me to Brent and Madison, as if I was some failed draft of a child. You excluded me from vacations, sneered at my clothes, told me I'd never fit in. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it felt like to be the daughter you never wanted? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks, smearing her perfect makeup. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." I cut in, my voice steadier now. "You meant every word. And you know what? I believed you for a long time. I believed I was small, worthless, unworthy of carrying the Hale name. But not anymore." Elaine's shoulders shook as she covered her mouth, her sobs muffled. For the first time, she wasn't the cold, untouchable woman who dismissed me at every turn. She was just human. Weak. Ashamed. I looked at her, and instead of pity, I felt something else. Power. Not the kind that came with stock percentages or boardroom authority, but something deeper. The power to finally confront the woman who broke me down, and to see her crack under the weight of her own guilt. "You wanted me small," I said softly, "but I grew stronger without you. And now, you're the one who has to live with what you've done." She couldn't meet my eyes. For once, the silence belonged to me. The revelation came on a quiet Wednesday morning, slipped across my desk in a confidential envelope from the company's head of security. I opened it, expecting routine reports, but what I found made my stomach twist with fury. Emails. Contracts. Wire transfer records. My brother Brent, my father's golden child, had been negotiating with one of our fiercest competitors, leaking information about upcoming projects in exchange for promises of cash and a seat at their table. For a long moment, I just stared at the evidence, my hands trembling. Then a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't shock, not really. I had always known Brent's arrogance would lead him to betrayal. But seeing it in black and white gave me the weapon I needed. The boardroom that afternoon was tense. Brent walked in smug as ever, Madison trailing behind him, and my parents seated with their usual air of superiority. They expected another clash, another chance to remind me of my place. Instead, I slid the folder across the table. "Before we begin," I said evenly, "I think you'll all want to see this." Brent flipped through the pages, his face draining of color. This is nothing. Fake. It's doctored." The head of security stood at my side, his voice firm. "The documents are verified. The communications were traced directly to your devices. This is conclusive." The silence that followed was suffocating. Madison shifted uncomfortably. Elaine covered her mouth in disbelief, and Thomas's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "You sold us out?" Thomas roared, slamming his hand against the table. "You sold me out," Brent stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I was just exploring options." "She's ruining everything, Dad. I was trying to save us." I leaned forward, my voice sharp but controlled. "No, Brent. You weren't trying to save anyone but yourself. And now you're finished." The board voted unanimously, though the decision was already mine alone to make. Brent was stripped of his titles, his access revoked, his position erased in less than an hour. I watched him storm out of the room, shouting curses that echoed down the hall, but the sound only fueled my resolve. Then came Madison. The auditors had discovered her little side project, siphoning funds through shell accounts, disguising her designer obsessions as company expenses. I laid the proof in front of her, each receipt like a nail in the coffin of her entitlement. "You've been living off the empire while calling me pathetic," I told her coldly. "Consider your accounts frozen. You're cut off." Her shriek was piercing, a mixture of rage and desperation, but I didn't flinch. Finally, there was Thomas. My father, who once dismissed me as weak, now sat silently at the end of the table. His influence, his authority, his carefully built legacy, all slipping through his fingers. He met my eyes, but for the first time, he had no words. And in that silence, I knew. The Hale Empire was mine. Entirely, irrevocably mine. The iron gates creaked open slowly as I drove up the long, winding driveway of my grandfather's estate. The Hale mansion stood tall against the fading light, its stone walls glowing in the evening sun. I hadn't set foot here since his funeral, and yet the air carried his presence, the scent of old wood, roses from the garden he loved, and the quiet dignity that had always set him apart from the rest of the family. This was mine now. Not through arrogance, not through greed, but through the trust he had placed in me when no one else believed I was worth anything. Tonight, I wasn't just visiting, I was coming home. The staff welcomed me with warmth I hadn't known in years. Some of them had worked here since my childhood. People who remembered the quiet girl trailing behind her grandfather, listening to his lessons while the others dismissed him as too stern, too old-fashioned. They looked at me now with pride, not pity, and I felt the shift deep in my chest. My belongings had already been moved in. My modest apartment, the one they mocked, was empty now. Here, in these halls, I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like what I truly was, Richard Hale's chosen heir, the rightful head of this legacy. Meanwhile, the family I had once longed to belong to was scattered like ashes in the wind. Brent was drowning in lawsuits after his betrayal became public knowledge. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now whispered with contempt. Madison, stripped of her endless credit cards and allowances, had been reduced to pawning her luxury handbags just to survive. And Elaine, my mother, who had once looked at me as though I were less than nothing, now spent her days in seclusion, too ashamed to face the world that had once adored her. Thomas, the patriarch who ruled our lives with iron and arrogance, was the hardest to face in my mind. But he too had fallen. Without influence in the company, without wealth to prop up his pride, he was just a man, bitter, powerless, and aging. The empire he thought would always be his slipped permanently into my hands, and he could do nothing but watch. I walked through the halls of the estate that night, stopping in my grandfather's study. His chair sat empty, the smell of leather and old books filling the air. I ran my fingers along the desk where he had signed countless documents, guided by his steady hand. And I whispered, I kept my promise. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars bright against the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because I had destroyed them, but because I had proven them wrong. The best revenge wasn't their downfall. It was standing here, in the very place they thought I'd never deserve, knowing the truth. They once mocked me for pretending to be rich. But in the end, I was the only one who ever truly was. Do you think I made the right choice standing my ground and taking control of what was mine? Or should I have shown my family mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you would have done in my place. Do you think I made the right choice standing my ground and taking control of what was mine? Or should I have shown my family mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you would have done in my place.